episode of The Blame Game. The regular season is finally done, and the end of it was just as hype as expected. We finally know the playoff bracket, and I personally cannot wait for games this weekend coming up. But before then, we need to look back at one of the biggest games from this weekend in deciding the playoff seeding. That's right, we're talking about 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid, which got a ton of comments because Team Liquid jumped out to a massive lead in this game, crushing all three lanes before slowly losing fight after fight after fight and somehow collapsing and losing this entire game. There was some comments about itemization, but the vast majority was around Bjergsen, to the point that some people were questioning his all-pro potential and saying that he's just getting by on name value. I'll skip recapping the early game and just say that Team Liquid shit on 100 Thieves for the first 15 minutes of the game. And even after that, they were still able to find a number of good pickoffs in side lanes. It was just the 5v5s that Team Liquid was getting absolutely dumpstered in, and that's where a lot of people noticed Bjergsen's underperformance. We had EG's head coach Rigby on Hotline League as well as Peter Dunn, and I had the privilege of asking him this question directly on that show, knowing that it would probably be my topic of the blame game this week.
But like, isn't the problem there like Skarner only ulting Gwen throughout the whole game when Senna Seraphine is like always open too? I think
I haven't rewatched it yet.
That's the problem. Like, you have like a easy execution. Like Skarner has R with some of the carries with no flash, and then you go for Gwen, which is like also possible to kill, but like hardest to kill at the same time, right? Core not being able to ult on Gwen TP on the Nash, that was an int. And then Skarner ulting Gwen all the time. Like, those two are the primary reason why Tia lost yesterday. With
the focus shifted onto Santorin, I rewatched the games with Rigby's comments in mind and tried to see where he was coming from. And in multiple of the late game team fights, Santorin's ultimate choices left a lot to be desired. Here, he could have basically grabbed anyone after this mistaken blast cone put everyone around him, but Santorin tunneled on closer instead of the backliners. Similarly, in the Baron fight right afterwards, Core JJ has a great engage and they insta-give Huhi. From this position, he can hold his ultimate for peeling whenever someone tries to jump into the backline, or he can try and meet up with Whippo and continue diving the enemy's backline. Instead, he just grabs Closer and pulls him towards his carries, basically escorting him to give him an angle to flash on top of them. He was also a part of this bad Baron turn here, charging into Seraphine with no ultimate and just handing them a kill. However, I find myself pretty sympathetic to Santorin overall still, because he was the main force of good for Team Liquid in the mid game, finding a lot of those pickoffs in the side lanes to give them angles into the game. They only had that Baron angle because of his help killing Abadaga here. Most of his worst plays were after Team Liquid had already thrown their lead, and Core JJ was complicit in a lot of the plays that lost them that lead. Core just absolutely biffs his ultimate onto Gwen here, neither locking down the single target nor saving it for the threat to throw and dive into the backline when they punish Santorin for charging forward. In another situation, when Santorin uses his ultimate on a frontliner in the side lane, he makes the fight 5v4 in Team Liquid's favor. If he was their only form of engage, I would criticize Santorin's use of his ult on Gwen here, but in theory, he can use the ult to gain a man advantage and then save the main engage for Core JJ. However, Core gets chain CC'd and dies even through his stopwatch with no ultimate usage. So following Rigby's logic, I agree that Core JJ and Santorin are candidates to receive the blame that has been thus far squarely placed on Bjergsen's shoulders by the community. The final piece of the puzzle is I just need a couple plays that I can point to in the mid to late game to show that Bjergsen's impact over that portion was still positive. Okay, well, in both of these fights, Santorin pulled the wrong member, and Bjergsen kind of just follows up on that engage and helps kill them. It's not really wrong, but definitely doesn't do a ton, especially not in that 31-minute one where he seems to struggle to find an angle into the fight. It's not really great in this Baron turn one either. He kind of just gets CC'd and maybe lands 4 spells the whole fight before dying right before his ultimate comes out. On the no Core JJ ult one, he wants to reset while the rest of the team is making this play, which forces him to have to TP back into it. And there's not really a good ward placed for him to TP into, so he kind of just arrives in the middle of the fight and dies. It's hard to blame him completely without knowing the comms, but it also wasn't good. You can also maybe criticize his overly safe mentality for not just ulting in the middle of the fight and going down swinging instead of trying to E out of there and survive. Okay, let's look a little bit earlier in the game before some of these other fights that we're talking about. At the 14-minute Rift Hurl fight, he gets zoned by Abadaga's wall. He gets a few pokes in, but when he actually shuffles in and tries to flash forward to chase, he can't actually find any of the kills. At this bot lane dragon fight, Bjergsen zones away 2 members of 100 Thieves while his team initially finds a pickoff trading support for top lane. First, the angle of his ult would push Abadaga into the wall quite a bit, and the game calculates that he wouldn't make it over, so basically Bjergsen gets shunted the Y coordinate portion of the shove back, and Abadaga ends up behind the wall. He doesn't even need to panic flash to get behind the soldiers again. Second, I do not understand how this isn't a bug onto FBI. The soldier is basically standing directly on top of him, and the game is supposed to grab anyone even further behind the model of the soldiers by an extra 150 units. I have no fucking clue why FBI isn't scooped here. A combination of math and, as far as I can tell, a bug screw over Bjergsen's engage attempt here. Speaking of this fight, how do 5 members of Team Liquid go into this 20-minute dragon fight against this team comp from 100 Thieves and none of them have heal cut? A lot of the comments were discussing it, but the general sentiment was that the healing was not a problem in this game for 100 Thieves. Okay, look at Wukong in this fight. Do not count any other sources of healing, and tell me that heal cut wouldn't have mattered. Between Triumph, Sunderer, Conqueror, Pot, and Wukong passive, he heals for 709 minimum by himself in that fight. That's just from the numbers that pop up that I can count, not including regen. That's not even also looking at Senna healing herself to full over and over and over again. Some people were arguing that the 800 gold for Executioners is not worth stopping down and slowing your IE's completion for, which makes a little bit of sense, but looking at the game circumstance, the 800 gold would have been a very worthwhile purchase here. Especially that considering right before this fight, Han Sama recalls for a stopwatch and a pink ward, meaning he probably has 800 gold. So, even if Sivir is a total chump pre-Infinity Edge, which, by the way, she's not, and Han Sama was the richest person in this game, so he was totally on fine and pace with the game. Even if you think that, then stopping down for any item is wrong, but he did it anyways, and he went for Stopwatch instead. And you can compare that compared to the Executioner's Calling. And Stopwatch helps in 10 to 20% of situations as an insurance policy if you fuck up, whereas the heal cut will help in literally every fight you take versus this team comp. Even if you prefer Stopwatch in that scenario, by the time this 29-minute fight rolls around, Han Sama still hasn't used his Stopwatch, and now he's building Pen, you know, for all that armor on the enemy team instead of heal cut. Yeah, I know LDR's passive is cool and all, but it is in no way better than the heal cut from Immortal Reminder, especially considering that you need like 2,000 health to even get max value from that passive, and 100 Thieves comp doesn't have any true tanks as Gwen and Wukong don't stack that much health. The one caveat that I'll give that Reddit comment is that they're right that the Senna Seraphine bot lane brings a lot more annoying things than just healing that probably matter more in a game like this, but to say that the healing doesn't mean shit is just completely ridiculous. So taking all of that into consideration, the other candidates, the bad itemization, the spaghetti code, the good early game, the bad late game, I've tabulated the results, and yeah, I still mostly agree with Reddit. Bjergsen had an incredible early game and proceeded to have basically no game impact from 15 minutes onwards. Yes, there were a lot of other things that were fucked up in this game and they made bigger mistakes, but I think it's fair to hold Bjergsen to a higher standard. However, in classic hyperbolic fashion, Reddit has gone a little bit too far, saying that if Bjerg makes All-Pro, then he's just getting it off name value. Again, let's turn to Rigby.
So what I think are the 3 candidates for All-Pro mid are Jojo, Tukui, Bjergsen. Bjergsen, I really value him high because I don't remember a game that has been like the primary reason for his team losing, honestly.
Yep.
And then being able to be consistent for that much amount of time, even with the break, is kind of like really impressive.
Listen, I get it's not sexy to say Bjergsen had a great split, all things considered, with what everyone expected out of Team Liquid, and I know that this game leaves a bad taste in your mouth with recency bias. However, let's not pretend that Palafox, Abadaga, Takoi, and Jensen did not have similar weekends where they were running it down for games or just completely invisible. They just don't have the Team Liquid super team bad target on their back that Bjergsen does. Not to say that Bjergsen's my first pro all-team vote, that's probably going to Jojo, but statistically and game impact wise and eye test wise, Bjerg probably deserves an all-pro this split. That's gonna do it for this week's episode of The Blame Game. It's the last weekend of the regular season, completely done now for this year of the LCS. That means we're heading into the postseason and then into Worlds. The ramp up is beginning. We start this weekend on Saturday with this Team Liquid super team going up against FlyQuest. We'll have to see if they've bounced back, learned their lessons, or if we'll get an upset here from the 6th seed in FlyQuest. See you then.
You know what is going to be really effing expensive? Worlds. I'm going to try to go to Worlds. No updates yet. I can't tell you what I'm doing or where I'm going or what part. Anyway, it's going to be very, very expensive. And if you guys would like, if you are purchasing something from Alienware, you can actually help cover those costs directly, because for the first time ever, if you purchase through the link that is in the description, alienware.com/Travis, that a portion of that sell will go towards me. First time I've ever done this with Alienware. They offered it to me, and I'm really excited about the fact that we're actually doing this sort of direct cut thing where you just know a portion of what you purchase will come back to TGI, so that I can afford to do things like spend, I don't know, forever in New York, which is a very expensive city. I don't know if you know that. Anyway, the whole point is, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the interview. Please hit up the link. Thank you to Alienware for our sponsorship, and we'll see you later.